Haven't done this in a couple weeks, guys, because I'm a little rusty too. We've got some big surprises coming for you next week on the show. That's all I can say for now. I'll leave it at that, but don't forget to tune in. Now this week, guys, we're going to be talking all about Dota 2, specifically the huge sweeping sort of overhaul, rework, whatever you want to call it, changes that Valve just announced to their major system in that competitive sphere. And we've got none other than, in a few moments, David Gorman. You know him better probably as LD, caster, tournament organizer, Dota 2 personality extraordinaire.
Beyond the summit!
Beyond the summit. Beyond the summit. He's going to be on in just a moment. Dennis, you are one of our resident Dota experts, one of our Dota writers. What are you looking to ask LD today?
I mean, just his general thoughts. There's a lot going on with the changes with the major system and just the tournament circuit in Dota 2. And he has a lot of opinions and a lot of perspectives to give on that topic.
Let me ask you this. When you first saw the news, maybe it was a press release, maybe it was the story published on theScore eSports app and desktop.
Keep going. Keep going.
I messed up my little plug there. But when you first saw the news, what was your emotional instant reaction?
Well, I mean, when I read the headline and that they were basically introducing the miner system from which is used in CSGO, I was excited. This is something that I really wanted to see brought into Dota. Yeah. But I think once I started looking at some of the details, particularly with the point system and stuff like that, okay, I was maybe a little bit less excited.
That's fair. That's fair. I can tell you I was working that day. It was a Canadian holiday. There was just me and one writer in, and we were planning to go home early. And then he turned around and said, yeah, I think this is news. And I went, oh my God. Okay. Yeah. So that didn't happen. So thank you, Valve. Thank you very much for ruining my hour early takeoff.
They had to get it out there before the 4th of July, man. It's major news, and they, you know, they wanted to go worldwide with it.
Major news with a capital M. And with that, let's waste no more time. Let's bring in LD and get his thoughts on it, guys. David, are you there?
Hey, how's it going?
It's going great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Thanks for having me.
Oh, it's our pleasure. Thank you so much for making time for the theScore eSports podcast. We know you're really busy over there at the BTS house, so we do appreciate it.
Yeah, never too busy to talk Dota, you know.
Yeah, I feel you on that one. Now we've got kind of a full clip of questions here. So if you don't mind, I want to just get right into it. And I want to ask you actually the same thing that I just asked Dennis, which was when you first heard the news. Now maybe that was with Valve's press release, maybe you got it in advance. What was your instantaneous knee-jerk thought?
So initial gut reaction, very positive. I think it's pretty clear that third-party events have not really had a great clear place in the ecosystem ever since the introduction of the major system. There's this kind of black box where you don't really know how Valve decides invites. You know, a lot of people have the belief that if you win a big tournament, then you'll get an invite to TI or a major, and sometimes that's true. But you know, what counts as big? That's always been unclear. You know, events closer to TI obviously matter a lot more than events in the first half of the year. So it's in a lot of ways been difficult for teams to figure out which events are important to play. It's been difficult for teams to know if they're close to being invited, if they still have a long way to go. It's just they're playing in the dark, basically. And I think also, you know, obviously the old system made it a lot harder for organizers where because of that uncertainty, teams did not particularly value those third-party events. There was a handful that were so big that, you know, I'd say probably Epicenter, possibly DAC, where winning that most likely gets you a TI invite. But even for those, you know, there were a lot of people who I respect saying, I'm not 100% sure if IG gets an invite to TI. They want DAC, but that was a while ago. It was one tournament. Similar arguments perhaps could be made about Epicenter in the same regard, although it was closer to TI, so probably more important in Valve's eyes. But you never really know for sure. Having a point system means you are going to know. Obviously, there's a lot of potential for issues with any such system, given that teams can still reshuffle from the sounds of it. So, I mean, without jumping too much into the new system, I imagine we'll do that. I think in general, I was very positive about it. I think if done correctly, this is a great way to give clear meaning to third-party events. I think it's a good way to get more of the top teams participating in them. I think one of the issues Dota has had is that that top, probably like 6 to 8 teams, especially in the West, has become hyper selective about which events they play. And part of that is because these third-party events are just so tiny in terms of prize pool and prestige relative to the majors over the last 2 seasons that, you don't see EG or OG, even teams like VP, IG to some extent, as much as you would, I think, in the new system. So if done correctly, I think it's great news for organizers. I think it can still be a really nice system for the teams. In theory, I think there's some questions about whether there will be as much prize money available for those teams. But I think it will give them more confidence that they know which events matter and what they need to do to get to PI, which in the end is more important than all those other events and even the old majors combined as far as prize money and everything goes on with it.
And I mean, some of these issues are not. It's not just Dota too. When you're talking about burnout and knowing which, what tournaments you want to play in and stuff like that, across the board, I mean, it's nice to see somebody step up and take an ownership role on this and say, this is how it's going to work. And really see it's a holistic approach to the players. And when you look at traditional sports, something like, NCAA football, for example, where you don't know who's in the championship bowl, you don't know who deserves to go where, and it's so arbitrary. It's nice to see, again, some sort of system, point system, and it's very detailed and very elaborate, and that's definitely the first impression. But then, David, you've gone on to tweet on Twitter that lots of opportunities for abuse with any points qualification system plus roster reshuffling. Valve will need to be very careful with the design. So with that said, your first impression, very positive. What led you to make that tweet?
No, I mean, overall, there's still a lot of details to be released, right? Basically, all we know is that the Valve majors are going away. Third-party tournaments will be able to apply to become either majors or minors. And if those events meet a minimum prize pool and they're selected, then they'll get double that prize pool and Valve will provide the other half. We also know you'll be required to have these qualifiers for all 6, I'll call them major regions. Valve is going to take a more hands-on role in managing the schedule, and then teams win points through these events that help them get to TI. So that's basically all we know. I would be surprised if there weren't more criteria. There's probably more events that could hit for example, the minor prize pool threshold than Valve wants to have as minors. I can only imagine they want to have some sort of oversight as far as which organizers are approved for these. There's always new companies looking to enter the eSports scene, and sometimes we've seen the likes of Gaming Paradise, I think, is a great example last year, where the event was a total disaster and teams never got paid, passports were confiscated. I can't imagine just because someone says, oh, we have a $150,000 prize pool, Valve is just going to give them a minor. There's got to be more to it than that, right? So they're going to be vetting these tournaments in some way. I mean, that seems like common sense to me, even though they haven't really announced what the process is. And so the question is, what are the other criteria? So I don't think you can really judge it without knowing the full process or, what they're looking for. Obviously, it kind of diminishes the value of a major or a minor if you have, let's say 50 of both. I don't think we're going to have that either. But, the question is, how many of these will there be? Who's going to be allowed to run them? What are the criteria for selection? What sort of restrictions are there, if any, placed on these tournaments? Are there certain types of sponsors that you can't have? Will there be any other support from Valve? Are they going to help? For example, they want to have all 6 primary regions having qualifiers. Will they be providing any support for tournaments to, help secure visas? Getting a visa for someone from South America or CIS is often a lot more challenging than it is for Western Europe, other countries in North America, that sort of thing. So, do they provide any logistics support in that regard? Are they providing any avenues for third-party crowdfunding, either to grow the prize pool and/or to help cover the cost of running these events? That's all unclear. So it's hard to really evaluate it too much. I think in general, I really like the direction of letting third-party events have a direct place in kind of, I'll call it the ladder or the pathway to TI. Now, the devil's in the details. So it's hard to judge it, but, I am optimistic. I think a lot of, specifically with the point system, it's less that I think the system's bad or that I'm like cynical about it. And it's more, there are just a lot of opportunities for abuse. You know, we kind of saw that with the original roster lock, where when Valve first released the old major system, there was just a roster lock deadline, and that was the last day that you could join a team, but there was nothing about like a deadline for dropping players. So what would happen sometimes, either intentionally or otherwise, is teams would, you know, they'd be trying to replace one or two of their players, and then they would boot them like 24 hours before the roster lock, 3 hours before, leaving those players no time to go and find another team. So Valve eventually changed that system so there was a separate drop and add deadline. So you couldn't drop anyone after a certain day, and then there's this like window to add new players. So, you know, again, like at first it was kind of a flawed system. I think the new adjusted system was a lot better, much less open to abuse. And the same thing's going to be true with qualifying points. There's probably loopholes and issues that, you know, we haven't seen yet. It's hard to know what those loopholes will be, or potential pain points will be, without knowing the system, though. We don't know how many points a minor is going to get, how many a major is going to get, how many of these tournaments there will be, you know, how many points you need to get to TI. Are there any other criteria? You know, I know one of the concerns I have with any qualifying point system is you want teams to know how they can get to TI. You also want them to have a reason to keep on playing throughout the year. So, you know, like I'll take the old Navi as a good example, like back around the TI2 era. They won basically everything, through that, like up until that TI, and then after it, this team was incredibly successful in the West. So, you know, in theory, if they're earning qualifying points, a team could qualify 3 months into the year. You know, you don't want the top 2-3 teams to be basically sitting, pulling their, you know, heels for 9 months of the year. That's not good for the ecosystem. That's not good for the tournaments. So, you know, is there a requirement that you have to play at least one event, you know, within 3 months of PI invites being announced, or, you know, so that's just one example. I think the bigger concern is probably around players screwing each other. You know, Valve clearly wants to give the players power over the organizations, and I think there's a lot of benefits to that. You know, you look back at the history of esports, and it's just littered with orgs really screwing their players over, cheating them out of money, not paying them when they're supposed to, forcing the players to take them to court, not providing promised travel support, not providing the infrastructure they initially were offered, monetizing the players like this is without their knowledge or permission, or in ways they didn't agree to, not giving them a cut of like new avenues of monetization. So there's a lot of examples of orgs maybe screwing over their players in the past. Obviously, there's a lot of great orgs too, but Valve really wants to stop that. That's great. However, players can still screw players, and they have before. Even so-called player-run orgs. I mean, ultimately, to me, at some point, a player-run org becomes, as the more it grows, the more successful it becomes, the more and more it resembles a traditional org. Yeah. And you know, Team Secret's probably a good example where, you know, I don't actually know, no one really knows the truth of what happened with that team, but the point is, like, whether or not, you know, anyone on Team Secret kind of hurt the other players. Some of the other players on like Envy felt like he was cheated or not treated fairly, and that was with a player-run org. So, and I think with this point system, there's potential for the same issues where the way it sounds like, basically you can kind of boot people. Like, let's say you want to replace 2 of your teammates, and as long as you've 3 of like the very successful ones on the team, only the top 3 point earners count towards your qualifying points. So, for example, EG could decide to, you know, pick Zai, pick Arteezy. They would have the same number of qualifying points as with all 5 of those players being on the roster, and then they could add whoever they wanted. So it feels like any block of 3 players can really screw over the other 2. Obviously, those players have a lot of points, presumably, if it's a successful team, and then, you know, that gives them a lot of leverage in negotiations with other orgs, but it also creates this weird power dynamic where suddenly, you know, if a high point earning player gets booted from his team and someone else wants to get to TI, you know, all of a sudden, like, these guys become extra valuable, not just as like individual players, but more so specifically for their points. So it creates some weird power dynamics with the roster shuffling. We also don't know what the new roster system looks like. So again, it's really hard to say how these things will play out. I just hope Valve, you know, thinks through all these scenarios, and also, you know, continues to be receptive to community feedback. I think they've been really good with it in the past with the roster system, where when some abuses were uncovered, they resolved them for the future. What I really like about this new system is it it ensures everyone has a fair shake. So, like one of the big controversies in Dota over the last 3 to 6 months has been Ace, and specifically what happened to Team Wings, the TI6 champions, later known as Team Random, where their players essentially ran afoul of Ace guidelines or expectations for how players are added and dropped to orgs. eHome tried to add some players that didn't go through the approved process, so suddenly eHome was not allowed to participate in any sanctioned tournaments. Some of these players were running into bans. So, if any Chinese run events want to be a minor or major, in other words, if they want to get those top Western teams and have them really care about the event and have their event be part of the circuit, they got to play by Valve's rules. So that is what I really like about this, whereas before it felt like there were no rules for third-party events. Valve had no management of the calendar, but now Valve is creating an incentive to kind of fall in line and abide by whatever all the other strains are that are attached to this prize pool contribution. So I think it's going to clean up some of the mess and the corruption that we've seen emerging from the scene. It can also create opportunities for players to take advantage of each other. But I think if done correctly, it's a big step in the right direction.
See, that's some shit you don't get in 140 carry.
That's true. And boy, you said it, LD, like the devil is in the details, and we really don't have many details at this point. Like I had so many questions when I read through their press release. One of my initial thoughts when I was reading the requirements is like, okay, you need 500K to be a major, right? And Valve will match that. And it's like, okay, we don't know the other requirements, and I agree that I truly hope there are other requirements besides money and a LAN final, because then everybody's having a minor, right?
Yeah.
But one of my first thoughts was like, okay, who's got 500K to spare, right? And even though this system at first kind of looks like, oh, anyone can have a major, it's like, is this designed to have PGL like still host the majors? Like, is anything going to change because of that money threshold, right?
Yeah, that is a really good question. So, I'm not super familiar with, how PGL runs their business. Obviously, everyone knows they put on a great show. They're an awesome production company, arguably the best in esports, or if not, then certainly on the very short list. But, for the most part, at least what I've seen, they are primarily involved with kind of producing what I'll call white label events. So like producing the majors. Their first, I think for Dota, their first big venture now into what's in theory a PGL event is the CSGO major. So I believe the way it works for those is the organizers are essentially given the prize pool by Valve, and then everything else the organizer is responsible for. I'm not actually sure, but this is what I've been told. So in that case, PGL presumably is running more of like truly like their own event, which includes sponsor sales, handling the venue rental, handling all the logistics around the event. In the past, they've done a lot of that stuff for the Dota majors, but some of it has been handled by MCW, the logistics company that Valve has used. So again, not really sure how things break down. I would be pretty surprised if PGL doesn't try to run a Dota major. I think this is a big opportunity for companies that can do a great job. Obviously, they have a proven track record. Valve clearly likes working with them since they ran the last 3 Dota majors and they kept on going back to them. So I'm sure they'll be encouraged to run one, and I'm sure there's a decent chance they will be. The main thing that is definitely different, though, is you need to have like a strong kind of sales team, I would say, in order to run one of these things. In the past, like when companies would bid for the Dota majors, Valve is basically covering everything out of pocket. So you need to put on a great show. You need to run a great tournament. You're not expected necessarily to find ways to make that event profitable or break even. Valve is covering the cost. So that is a big change with this. I think companies that have a really strong sales team are really good at monetizing their events. Probably the best company at that, I would guess, is ESL, based on track record and just scuttlebutt. But I'm not sure. So ESL is the one company I expect to like really try to be pushing to run a bunch of majors, a bunch of minors. I think they're probably the one company to me that's like the happiest about this news, or one of the few anyway. Now, I think it's generally great news for the scene. It's an injection of relevance for these third-party events. However, adding to the prize pool does not directly help an organizer cover the cost of the event. So, for example, let's say we decide to run a summit. It's $150,000. So we would have to first of all increase our prize pool a little bit. It's not a big jump from 100 to 150. Valve then gives us $150,000, adds the prize pool, puts us in the minor circuit. We still have to pay all the other costs. Those don't go away, and this money that's earmarked for prize pool does not help cover it. So we're talking flights, hotels, any costs related to visas, food, ground transportation, production costs, gear rental, talent fees, any extra people you're bringing in to help make content possible. And if you have a venue, you've got to have build out. You need to have concessions, janitorial staff. You have to have security. There's a lot. Obviously, you have to sell tickets, and that whole system costs money. So there's a lot of extra costs that go into running events, and this does not really directly help cover them. So that's where I think a lot of organizers are cautiously optimistic, but they're also thinking it's great that we're going to have an increased prize pool, but is there going to be any support from Valve to help cover all the other costs of running the event, which still exist? And those costs have existed in the past for third-party events, and I think also there's some evidence that maybe those costs are too much for organizers. Like you've seen ESL runs is not branching out into Dota 2 the way they are, for example, the CSGO. MLG has stopped doing Dota 2 entirely. Is this enough to entice those companies and others like them to come back? I'm not really sure, and I think a lot of it depends if there's any other support from Valve or any other avenues that they're going to help offer to monetize these events. I do think there's a couple of things that Valve can do that would really help, that wouldn't necessarily cost them a lot. I think the number one thing, which I've hammered on a few times, is I really hope as part of having this majors and minors system that they are going to promote these events directly. I mean, Dota 2 has a huge social media presence, the official account, Facebook, Twitter. Obviously, the game client is their number one platform, probably for sharing news with the community. And so my hope is that Valve will promote these events, both just in terms of building awareness and also ideally doing what they do for the Valve majors right now, which is actually embedding the stream in the client. If you look at, there was a big jump in viewership between the Shanghai major and the Manila major. Both events were on basically the same time zone. Shanghai did have a lot of technical issues and kind of, I'll call drama surrounding it with the whole Too Good firing. But at the same time, the tournament ran mostly fine, especially by the main event. As far as like the broadcast went, all of the biggest issues after the group stage were really, kind of the drama and affected maybe the people at the event, but not so much the viewers. And still, there was a massive jump in viewership, and I think almost all of that can be attributed simply to the fact that the streams were embedded in the client. So I think that's a huge way Valve can help these events in a very tangible way, because if you've got more people watching your stream, that makes your sponsors happier. That maybe allows you to sell sponsorships at higher rates or to companies that wouldn't otherwise be interested. I think it also lends some legitimacy to these events and being able to tell a brand that, hey, this tournament is going to be, everyone who opens Dota will have a chance to look at it. That goes a long way, I think, in building interest. So I think there's a lot Valve can do as far as promoting these events without really costing them a ton of time and resources. The other big value add that I think Valve could offer to third-party events is to offer avenues for monetization. It's pretty clear at this point that the majority of Dota fans are really eager to support tournaments that they enjoy through the client. There's not really a whole lot of evidence that they will support through other means. So, we tried replacing the old compendium crowdfunding with a partnership with Smash GG for the Summit 6. There was a lot of things we could have done better, but the interest was very lukewarm. I think Dota fans generally, when they're looking at how can we spend money, how can we support tournaments or things we enjoy, they're mostly looking at doing it through the club. So I hope that there's a way that Valve can offer some support to these events to help cover all those other costs besides the prize pool. That is the dream. Is it in their plans? I have no idea. But I think that will be a big factor in whether or not you see the likes of MLG or ESL or some of these other companies really making a big jump back into Dota, or if they're just kind of lukewarm and maybe try an event here or there but aren't really committed. But so again, so much still to learn from what Valve has planned, and no idea what it's going to look like. But if they do it right, it's going to be amazing. Even if they just help promote these events but don't help them in any sort of direct financial way besides the prize pool. I think the fact that you're an official Valve event, you're a minor or major, you directly help teams get to TI by earning qualifying points. That still goes a pretty long way towards improving viewership for these events, as well as building, interest in them that can translate into sponsorship or other support. But I mean, obviously, the dream scenario is that they also bring back third-party crowdfunding. We'll see if that happens, but fingers crossed.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, that was actually one of the big questions I wanted to ask was you were talking about like tournament support and marketing. And one of the unfortunate things that came, whether just due to, this is probably not the correct word, but incompetence from the switch from source 1 to source 2 is the removal of the third-party compendiums. You guys were kind of affected by that as well from being a tournament organizer, but I think it affected TOs at large as far as how they basically lost a revenue stream for hosting their events, and it seems like now it seems to be the ripe time to kind of bring that back. But I'm still kind of like holding that idea at arm's length that they would even consider that, considering I think it worked out for Valve keeping that sort of in-house. What are your thoughts on that?
I don't think Valve's ever really communicated openly about their exact reasons for kind of moving away from allowing third-party events to monetize in the client. I mean, you can theorize about it, but really, there's no clear answer why they did it. Was it less profitable for them? Was it just too much work? Did they not want to, were there concerns about, offering that sort of crowdfunding to an event, and then an event not, representing Valve or the game in the best light? There are tournaments that have had chests, that have had tickets, that have had some sort of crowdfunding where, they didn't, maybe like the tournament had too many issues, or, things were said on camera or in social media or elsewhere that weren't things Valve wanted to have their name attached to. It's hard to know why they took it away. I don't know if they'll bring it back. And the other thing, I guess, that where it gets messy is, they also want to look after the workshop artist's interests. And so, is it really in an artist's best interest to partner with the tournament? There were some, I think, who felt like they had no choice in the old system, that this was like the best way to get your items in the game. At the same time, there is going to be a huge vacuum in terms of just how are items getting into the game now, because there's not going to be there's not going to be Valve majors anymore. So in the past they've had chests tied to those. They've also had battle passes. Are there just going to be battle passes that are unaffiliated with events now? Are those battle passes going to be tied to the majors, and the third-party majors will just kind of be a vehicle to promote them? Is like some percentage going to the organizer? Is that just directly going to Valve? Are they just going to be kind of standalone, if nothing to do with tournaments anymore? We really don't know. There's tons of different ways Valve could take it. I know a lot of workshop artists were, cautiously optimistic. I saw on social media, hoping that, okay, maybe there's going to be more opportunities for us to get items in the game now with the removal of the Valve majors. That whether that's standalone chests, standalone individual items, bundled items as a part of tournaments. I think they're all basically, well, it sounds like they haven't been told yet. They're just kind of fingers crossed, that something better will be available to them. There has been it seems like a pretty decent exodus from the Dota 2 workshop, with a lot of those creators either moving on to other games like CSGO or just exiting kind of the Valve workshop space entirely. As it's just become very difficult to get your cosmetics in the game for a lot of these creators. And, it's if you have savings, you can afford to miss a couple chests. But, for a lot of these guys, it's, if you don't get an item in the game for long enough, you can't pay the bills. And so, I think there's been quite a few that have moved on to more stable or reliable, ways to create digital goods, or, working as artists for companies, or doing other sorts of 3D modeling. So it's really hard to say. I hope that whatever system they come up with is something that ideally isn't too much work for Valve, because the old system was a ton of micromanagement for them. And then often what would happen is, Valve just wouldn't have time to get back to you, or the turnaround times were too long. And so even if you had good cosmetics, you would miss the window for your event. So I hope it's a system that doesn't require too much micromanagement from them. I also hope that it's something that incentivizes the workshop artists and brings some of these great people back to the workshop, or helps ensure that they don't leave. And ideally, I hope that it is something that also supports third-party events. So there's a lot of stakeholders to keep happy and to think of. I think there probably is an ideal solution, but it's hard to know exactly what's going to make the most sense for Valve without having access to their thinking and I'm sure financially there's a lot of considerations for that as well. So yeah, we'll see what happens. But fingers crossed that there is something, as the workshop otherwise is going to be quite dead.
Now, we're seeing a lot of structural changes in other esports at the moment, namely League of Legends with its franchising announcement, also Overwatch with its long awaited geolocated franchise league. And now Valve comes out with this reworked major system for Dota. And I'm just wondering, like, the other systems, be it franchising and geolocation, are clearly modeled after other things like traditional sports, right? And then this one, I'm sort of like, whoa, this sounds weird, right? Like, this is something sort of out of left field. And I'm just wondering, like, where the idea for this comes from. Were TOs consulted? Because it sounds like you have all of the information that we have, which is not very much.
You get a lot of questions, though.
Yeah, a lot of questions.
Yeah, I don't exactly know who everyone in Valve talks to. They do engage somewhat with community members, be it artists, casters, tournament organizers. I don't know how much they've already figured out. Generally with Valve, in my experience, they're always iterating. So even if they have like a rough idea of how it's going to work now, that could change over the coming months. It can also change as issues emerge. I think they're still probably interested to see, like, what kind of proposals do they get? Do they get 50 proposals for a minor, or 500? Do they get 2?
Yeah.
It's hard to know, right? And that's going to affect a lot, how they look to adjust the system. And depending on, do all those organizers have similar concerns? Do some bring unique ones to the table? Are there certain partners that they really value who bring up certain issues? Then they're probably more likely to try and find a way to solve them. So I think a lot of it depends on what feedback they see from the community, specifically from the organizers. What do the players and the teams have to say? I know some of the teams and players have already expressed concern that, well, you're taking $6 million of prize money away. Are you really? Is that really going to be made up for with these events? In order to make it up, in theory, Valve needs to have 12 majors a year. If Valve is to be injecting, another $6 million. To make up for those majors directly, or is the hope for Valve that this is going to mean more organizers are willing to bring those bigger prize pools to the table, and then Valve doesn't have to spend as much, but there's still this healthy amount of prize pool for the team. So I think teams and players are a bit concerned about that. But yeah, we'll see. It's as far as League and Overwatch go. I'm really not. I don't think we can really deliver any judgment on Overwatch aside from, it's concerning that they've taken. It seems like with Overwatch they were hoping to have it ready by now, and it hasn't happened. I don't think they intended for there to be this much downtime, where there's third-party events were not really promoted for a while, but also not really encouraged. The Overwatch League didn't come out particularly quickly after game launch. They've started to make some moves in the right direction, at least with the Overwatch contenders. They have something going on for these Western teams, because really the only stable Overwatch League has been Apex in Korea. Aside from that, it's been pretty hit or miss. So Overwatch is in a weird place. I think they want to be a lot more like LCS in the long run. They're just not ready to release it yet. It took LCS, 2-3 years before it really came to fruition. So it's understandable it's taking a while, and they're clearly very ambitious with their plans for it. But jury's out until we actually see the real system. The game has a lot of other issues to figure out. It's very difficult. Someone who casted it a bit, it's very difficult to observe. It's difficult to follow the action.
Very true.
I think the viewer experience is very stressful because there's 12. By its nature, being a first-person shooter, there's 12 perspectives. You can only watch one of them at a given time. And watching the game top-down, because of the way the maps are constructed, it's not like a big open arena. There's all these corridors and cutoff points, and you've got heroes with crazy mobility, both vertical and horizontal. So even catching all the action at once is basically impossible, and the game's very fast-paced. So I think the biggest issues with the Overwatch stem around not so much the esports system, but more how do you make this a spectator experience that people can enjoy. I honestly find it easier to watch Overwatch a lot of times just in watching like a single person's first-person perspective, where you might miss some action, but at least it's less chaotic and disorienting, perhaps even at times seizure-inducing. If you jump, I had complaints in chat when I was observing, like I would switch player perspectives too much, and people would start to feel sick. There are people who are a lot better at observing, but it's still just a big challenge for everyone. So I don't know if they'll be able to figure that out without drastically changing either like the maps or the way gameplay works, and that would mean probably slowing everything down a lot, more simplifying things a lot, and that also takes away from the competitive integrity of the game. So it's a lot of difficult challenges for them to solve. With them also, I think the cool thing Overwatch has is a massive casual fan base, which is something that bears with League. And that's a big part of why League has been numerically the most successful esport as far as viewers, not as far as prize money. Valve has obviously been much better at getting fans to support their tournaments, but you can't really argue with League viewership. The only game that's been close to CSGO, and that's only recently. I don't know much about the LCS franchising thing. I think if done right, it means a more stable experience for fans. It's obviously really bad for the orgs that are not franchises. It kind of creates these haves and have-nots. At the same time, I do look at what sort of sports was I following before esports was a thing, and pretty much all of them were American sports that are franchising, and I was never sitting there thinking, the poor that poor like Milwaukee organization that wanted to create an NFL team but can't. I was just thinking, I'm a Philadelphia Eagles fan. I get to watch Eagles football. As an NFL fan, I'm happy. But obviously, we're like before that time, and so there's a lot of people who have stakes in things who don't really want to see franchising. But ultimately, what might not be best for all those other orgs may be better for the viewers. It's just hard to know. So it does bring a lot of stability. That's a big benefit. But, I personally love the Valve system. I think if done properly, what they've done in CSGO is absolutely fantastic. I still feel like CSGO overall has the healthiest third-party scene. I think you see a lot of innovation come out of that. You see a lot more competition than if it's just a top-down, you have no choice but to consume our product because we're the NFL and this is the only way to watch pro football. That's not the case at all in Dota. Definitely not the case in CSGO. And I'm kind of hoping that this new Dota model blends what's great about Dota with TI, which I think is something fans wanted for a long time, with all the other stuff that makes CSGO great and having a very deep, vibrant third-party scene, lots of room for new companies to enter, lots of room for innovation and competition. So I overall personally prefer the Valve model, especially what looks like the new direction, which is very promising. But I think the long-term evolution is potentially going to be more, it seems like more and more as new, but you look at not just LCS and Overwatch League, but also RLCS, also a lot of these like Rocket League, I mentioned RLCS, Vainglory has their own developer-run, top-down kind of league. It seems like that's kind of the bigger direction for a lot of games that want an esports scene is they're trying to more do it from the top down. They're more following that LCS Riot model. I don't know if that trend's going to continue, but it really does seem like Valve is the one company where they leave it total free for all, relative free for all. Any third party entrant is welcome to trade, run, invent for a game. That's really not true for many other developers.
Now, touching, going back to something you said earlier, we just very briefly touched on one of the qualifications, the new qualification set down by Valve, which is to have a 6-region qualifier, even for a minor. Is this like, I don't even know how to put this question. Is this good? Because this seems weird to me. Like, we're gonna have a South American qualifier for like every single minor. Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
So it sounds like a simple question. I think it's actually very complicated. It depends on your perspective. But in short, I think one of the biggest strengths that Dota 2 has, and this is over any esport, be it League, be it CSGO, be it StarCraft, doesn't matter. Dota has had by far the deepest worldwide competitive scene, period. Like, I don't think there's another game you can look at where Southeast Asia has been competitive and had some of the top teams. China's had some of the top teams. South America has at least made a decent showing at some Valve events, and Secret got knocked out by SG eSports. Before that, Unknown had an upset at the Frankfurt Major. Europe, CIS, like all these North America, all these regions have either won TIs or Valve events, or at least made a strong showing at them. And I think the primary goal for Valve is to continue to grow all of those regions and avoid StarCraft syndrome, I guess I would call it, where one region is just so dominant in Korea that it's either you contain them in their little bubble, and then when you get to your world championship, you've got all these other regions who just can't compete. Or you let those players go to those other regions, and then it's all mostly Korean players at the WCS finals. So I think Valve deserves a ton of credit in Dota 2 especially for having managed to grow these scenes and continuing to support them. As a minor or major organizer, if you're looking at like purely from a financial perspective, let's say you have 8 teams at a minor, would you rather have a South American team, or would you rather have, OG, and Secret, for example? Probably you'd rather have OG and Secret, at least if your primary focus is on the English audience. So this is maybe not in the immediate best interests of third-party organizers. I think it is, by and large, in the long-term best interests of the game and the health of the scene. And I think keeping those audiences vibrant will ultimately reap benefits for organizers, but not in the short term. In the short term, it probably will be, especially for events that have 6 or 8 teams or even 4 teams. I guess you can't have 4, but let's say you had 6. On that side of things, it probably hurts your overall viewership quite a bit, and maybe sponsor interest. But in the long run, I think it grows those scenes, it grows those regions, it grows the audience, and depending on, again, what sort of avenues for monetization, hopefully through the client there are for these tournaments, it could also really help revenue for them. But in the short term, I think it could be detrimental, but I understand why Valve wants to do it. I think it's important for the long-term health of the game, and I fully support it. Even the other thing that it does make challenging, like for us, for example, is obviously the visa situation. So some of these countries, it's growing increasingly difficult to get visas for, like Philippines is a lot of trouble. Some of the South American countries, CIS, some Chinese players. I think September from China has failed to get a US visa 6 or 7 times now. So, that's a big challenge. We deal with probably more as an American-based organizer than other organizers will. But it is something to keep in mind is you can have all these qualifiers. It doesn't mean you'll actually get all those teams to the main event. So we'll see how it works out. But I like it in principle. I think it's, even if it seems on paper like it's not ideal and maybe not what the bulk of like the English viewers would want, that doesn't mean it's not better for the game in the long run. That's
a fair answer, actually, and a very valid concern with the visa problem. And can we please make StarCraft syndrome? Can I have that written down somewhere? Can that be a meme?
Don't get me wrong. I love StarCraft. I'm really excited for Brood War Remastered.
Oh hell yeah! Me, you and me both, man. I'm purchasing that. Day one for sure.
I'm starting to play it competitively.
Oh yeah. It's been a long time since I've even done like a semi-serious ladder game. Although when Brood War HD was announced, I did totally download the original again and play it. And I got 1v1, got wrecked.
Nice.
LD, we are reaching our time limit here. So before we let you go, is there anything you wanted to say that we didn't get a chance to touch on, or any shout outs you want to do? Anything like that?
I don't know if there's any major topics we didn't already talk about here. I'm really excited to see what happens. Even if there are issues or even if they just backfire in some ways, I'm glad that Valve is trying. I think they deserve a ton of credit for doing their best to, make third-party events more viable and also more relevant. It might not work out well at first. There might be a lot of issues, but they're one of the few developers out there that are willing to try. Most developers nowadays just run their own tournament and either don't let other people run events or relegate them to total irrelevance. Like, I can go through the long list of examples, but I think it's pretty universally the case throughout the majority of esports. So I'm super thrilled to see that they're giving it a shot. I think there are a lot of details that will decide if it works out well or not. I do hope Valve will be receptive to feedback and open and dialogue with organizers, with players, with workshop creators, and with the community. And if they do all of that, I think even if it's not great at the start, it'll end up being great. But I ultimately am very optimistic. Just the fact that Valve was willing and they did listen to the community bodes well for the future. So I think more than anything, Valve does deserve a big shout out for giving this a shot, because to be frank, I don't think there's another developer, at least with an esport on their scale, that.
Well, I gotta say, LD, your optimism is filling me with some optimism. So it's infectious. Once again, thank you so much for taking the time to speak with theScore eSports. It was a real pleasure.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, guys.
Take care, David.
And there you go.
There's the awkward goodbye that we always have, where it's just like,
It's hard with this Skype thing to really say goodbye. It's hard enough to say goodbye to like mom, let alone like a
oh, I know. It's like, oh, you're still there?
professional
I
and
can't turn it
well-spoken
off.
man like LD. He got 140 character. You ask him about it, and it's a 10-minute detailed answer. This guy should be chairing this whole, get on Valve and help set up these majors.
If we could just have more guests like LD, because I have a whole paper of questions. I have a whole list of questions. And not only did I didn't ask them because he covered all of them like himself. Like he brought up the concern. Like I don't need to be here.
Yeah, he
awesome.
went L deep on the topic.
I saw some. There's some questions in the chat and whatnot, and we do see all of the chats on Facebook and on Twitch. We couldn't get to them all, but some of the questions that are out there, if you watch back on the VOD, you will see LD give very detailed answers about all these questions that are up in the air, man.
Yeah, he talked about the points, which is I think one person in the chat was actually asking about. So definitely go back and check the VOD.
Yeah. Shout out to everybody who submits questions. Unfortunately, a lot of them came in just as we were wrapping up. I guess the podcast was just getting some steam on social. Speaking of which, guys, we do this thing every week. Sometimes we do it twice a week. Once we did it 4 times a week.
Which will happen next week, right?
And I'm not talking about podcast, no. Next week, we're doing it quite a few times. We got a couple big surprises next week that I'm not going to spoil. But if you're into Hearthstone, if you're into fighting games,
I think he lost the Dota crowd already.
They're like, oh, we're
out.
We're gone. Like, screw this guy. And you know what? We got to be out too, guys, because it's about 8 o'clock p.m. Eastern Standard Time.
Yeah,
and that's time for us to punch the old time card.
People.
Excuse me.
People
punch people.
Punch the people.
Well, I don't do that in the workplace. That's workplace violence.
You've got. Hold on. Next time you give me the memo, you've got the Batman shirt on. You've got the Snoopy shirt on. You got this shitty, just regular old shirt, man.
Generic Ryan.
Yeah, generic old me.
On that note,
next time I will have a cooler shirt.
All right, you work on that. Bring a cooler shirt for next week. And until then, guys, for Ryan and for Dennis, I am Colin saying GG.
No re.
No re.